Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, we'll sink into a world just beneath our feet, a place of silence, softness, and astonishing secrets. Mushrooms aren't just food or folklore. They're architects of the forest, engineers of decay, and messengers between trees. They can glow like stars, digest rock, survive radiation, and even alter minds. And while we go about our lives above ground, entire cities of fungi are shaping the earth below. This isn't just biology. It's something older, quieter, and strangely familiar. So, if you're ready to disappear into the understory and dream beneath the roots, you're in the right place. And while you're settling in, before your eyes grow too heavy, I'd love it if you gently tapped subscribe or pressed the little hype button YouTube recently added. It's a small click, but it helps keep these experiments and explorations orbiting out into the algorithm. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's oddly fascinating to see where people are drifting off with us, scattered across the world like stars across the galaxy. Now take a deep breath, let your day drift away, and let's travel together into the quiet corners of the universe. In the soft dimness of a forest floor, where damp leaves curl inward and light arrives only in fragments, there lives a kingdom we nearly overlooked. For centuries, mushrooms were called plants, not because they fit the part, but because we didn't know where else to put them. They grew from the ground, after all. They had stems, sometimes caps, like blossoms. They didn't move. They didn't bleed. To the eye, they behaved as quietly as moss and as humbly as shrubs. So we assumed. But we were wrong. Mushrooms are not plants. They are not animals either. They belong to something else entirely, a separate kingdom, ancient and astonishing, the fungi. This kingdom has been living beside us, beneath us, within us, for as long as life has existed on land. It thrives in shadows, pulses in threads, and whispers its presence through rot, bloom, and breath. And yet, it took us until the late 20th century to formally give fungi their own biological domain. Not because they were hidden, but because they were so strange we mistook their alienness for familiarity. Fungi do not photosynthesize. They cannot make energy from sunlight like plants. They do not grow leaves or roots. Instead, they feed the way we do by consuming other things. But even in this, they are unlike us. Their digestion happens outside their bodies. Filaments of mycelium, impossibly thin and sprawling through the soil like threads of thought, reach out into their surroundings and secrete enzymes. These enzymes break down whatever they touch: wood, leaf, flesh, stone, and only then do the fungi absorb what remains. It is not ingestion. It is external digestion, a kind of alchemical melting that turns forest into food. Their structure is different too. Where plants build themselves with cellulose, fungi grow with chitin, the same material found in the shells of insects and the armor of crustaceans. This subtle shift makes them biologically closer to animals than to plants, even as they bloom like neither. And yet they are neither. They are something else, something older. Long before trees, long before flowers or birds, fungi were already here. Some of the earliest life on land may have been fungal. Fossils of towering prototaxites, giant, mushroom-like organisms as wide as a human, and several meters tall, dominated prehistoric landscapes for tens of millions of years. They stood alone, monoliths of a forgotten age, absorbing nutrients from decaying matter in the absence of forests, in the silence before leaves. At a time when the earth was still figuring out how to be alive, fungi were already mastering the art of survival. Their evolution is not a straight line. It is a tangled web, a mycelial map of branching paths and experimental forms. Fungi don't fit neatly into categories. Some behave like parasites, others like partners. Many shift roles depending on need or opportunity. There are species that live inside plants, helping them grow. Others invade insects and control their minds. Some digest radioactive waste. Others glow in the dark. Their diversity is staggering, their behavior contradictory, their rules mutable. And yet, they are consistent in one thing: transformation. Fungi are the agents of change in the natural world. They decay and renew. They digest and rebuild. They connect, dissolve, and distribute. In forests, they move nutrients between trees like traders in an unseen economy. In our bodies, they help digest food, shape our immune responses, and even affect our moods. They live in our homes, on our skin, and in the air we breathe. We are rarely without them, even when we don't see them. But perhaps the most extraordinary thing about fungi is how they refuse to be seen in parts. A mushroom is only the fruiting body, the temporary expression of something much larger, hidden beneath the surface. Like an apple without a tree, the mushroom is a signal, not a self. The real organism, the mycelium, sprawls underground, an interconnected web stretching meters, sometimes kilometers. It is the mind of the mushroom, the nervous system of the soil, the quiet intelligence of the forest, and it can live for centuries. This makes fungi difficult to study, difficult to classify, and difficult to describe. They blur the line between individual and colony, between organism and ecosystem. In trying to fit them into our categories, we've only learned how inadequate those categories truly are. To see fungi clearly, you have to let go of the familiar. You have to imagine a world where life is shared, dissolved, digested, and reborn. A world where intelligence might stretch not upward, but outward, not in spires, but in threads. A world where the border between death and life is porous, always softening, always shifting. The third kingdom is not a place of clarity. It is a place of transformation, a place where form is fluid, where digestion is external, and where the body is mostly unseen. It lives in the rot, in the breath of leaves, in the dampness that never dries. It lives in forgotten places. And now, as you rest and drift deeper, it lives here, too, in your thoughts, in your breath, in the soil of your dreams. Long before the first leaves rustled in a breeze, before roots burrowed and trunks reached skyward, the land was nearly silent, empty, rocky, harsh. The continents, newly formed and drifting, were barren stretches of stone, lashed by rain and wind. There were no forests, no birdsong, no green, only lichen clinging to the edges of rock and the slow, creeping presence of something stranger: fungi. Fungi were there before the trees, not just a little before, hundreds of millions of years before, long before branches reached for sunlight, long before animals crawled onto land, long before anything green rose more than a few inches above the ground. Fungi had already arrived, already begun their work. Quietly, patiently, they transformed stone into soil, digesting minerals, forming partnerships with the earliest plants, and creating the very conditions that would one day allow forests to grow. In the fossil record, there is a mystery that stands taller than any fern or moss of its time: prototaxites. Towering columns, some nearly 20 feet high, scattered across ancient landscapes like monoliths in a forgotten graveyard. For over a century, scientists debated what they were. Were they plants? Algae? The remnants of something long lost? But when the truth emerged, it was even stranger. These giants were fungi, not trees, not stalks, but massive, hollow tubes of fungal tissue rising from a world with no forests, no flowers, no leaves. In a time when most life clung close to the ground, prototaxites reached upward, solitary and immense, like the first idea of a forest imagined in a dream. And they weren't just tall, they were ancient. These towering fungi thrived around 420 million years ago in the Silurian and Devonian periods, a span of time so far removed from ours that even the continents wore different names. Back then, there were no animals with bones on land, no insects buzzing through air. Life above the ocean's surface was tentative, scattered, and small. But fungi were already building. Not building like beavers or bees, but building in the geological sense, shaping the very face of Earth. Their mycelium crept through the cracks in rocks, secreting acids, breaking down stone into dust. That dust mixed with organic matter from the first primitive life forms and began, slowly, to become soil. And with soil came the future. Trees, grass, roots, seeds. Fungi were not just survivors in this early land, they were its architects. It's hard to imagine from where we are now. We think of forests as ancient, of trees as the elders of the land. But the trees we know today are younger than fungi by hundreds of millions of years. Evolutionarily, fungi are closer in time to the oceans themselves than to the forests they now inhabit. And yet they continue to play the same role they always have, connecting, transforming, digesting, renewing. Even now, every plant you see is partnered with fungi. Almost all modern plant roots are laced with mycorrhizal fungi, microscopic networks that help them absorb nutrients and water. In return, the fungi feed on the sugars the plant creates through photosynthesis. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship, one that has lasted for over 400 million years. This is the part that's easy to miss. Fungi do not demand to be seen. They do not tower in pride or dazzle with color. Not most of the time. They move through the world in subtler ways. They grow where no one looks. They work in the dark. They were here long before the forest stood, and they will likely remain long after the last tree falls. To call them primitive would be a mistake. Age does not mean simplicity. The fungi that shaped the early Earth were already complex, already able to digest stone, to form structures, to build massive bodies without bones or bark. They were pioneers of chemistry and structure, of survival in a place that had never known life before. Imagine that, a world with no shade, no soil, no green, and in that stillness, a slow-growing tower, porous and hollow, drinking from the air, feeding from stone, a fungus, not a relic, but a beginning. It's possible we owe everything to them. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the forests we walk through. Without fungi breaking rock into soil, nothing would have grown. Without fungi partnering with the first plants, roots may never have dug deep enough to thrive. Without fungi decomposing the dead, the world would choke on its own waste. Every cycle we now take for granted, growth, death, decay, renewal, was begun by the third kingdom. And all of it happened before a single tree ever touched the sky. Even now, as you breathe in the stillness of your room, spores drift unseen in the air, fragments of something ancient, waiting, the descendants of the same silent engineers that stood like monuments in a forgotten land, before leaves, before wings, before time as we know it, older than trees, and still growing. Beneath the forest floor, below the roots and stones and writhing lives of insects, there is another world. It does not glitter or hum. It does not glow in the dark or breathe in the open air. It stretches in silence, in threads and filaments, too fine to see, too vast to fully imagine. You could walk through a forest for days and never know what lies just underfoot. But it is there, growing, reaching, listening. A vast, living network built not of wires or light, but of life. Itself, mycelium, the connective tissue of the fungal world. It winds invisibly between roots, wrapping gently around them, slipping through soil in search of food, of partnership, of purpose. In the right conditions, a single teaspoon of forest soil may hold more than 10 kilometers of these threads. Not metaphorical threads, actual, physical strands, hyphae stretching in every direction, weaving trees and plants into a system that acts, in many ways, like a brain, like a mind spread thin across the floor of the world. Scientists call it the mycorrhizal network. Mycorrhizal from the Greek mykes, meaning fungus, and rhiza, root, a name for the ancient alliance between fungi and plants. One gives water and minerals, pulled from the soil with a reach far greater than any root. The other gives sugars, spun from sunlight, carried down into the dirt as food. This isn't a barter system. It is more than trade. It is symbiosis, intricate and mutual. A collaboration more than 400 million years old, predating flowers, predating fruit, predating even the first insect wing. But it's not just about nutrients. It's about information. These networks do more than feed. They speak, not with voices or sound, but with chemical signals, electrical pulses, and molecular whispers passed from root to root, species to species. Through these underground threads, trees can send warnings of insect attacks. A spruce, bitten by beetles, can trigger nearby pines to boost their chemical defenses. A maple in distress may alert a birch. A mother tree, an older, deeply rooted giant, can sense the health of her seedlings and direct more carbon toward the weakest ones, helping them survive the shade. In this fungal web, cooperation happens in ways we are only beginning to understand. Even trees of different species can share resources, passing nitrogen or phosphorus from one to another through fungal intermediaries. A network of generosity, of strategy, of quiet resilience. The scientist Suzanne Simard first uncovered this connection in the forests of British Columbia, measuring how carbon moved between trees not through the air, but through the soil. Her work was met with skepticism, even ridicule. The idea that trees could communicate seemed sentimental, almost poetic, too far from the cold mechanics of traditional biology. But over time, the evidence grew impossible to ignore. Studies from Europe, Asia, and across the Americas confirmed the pattern. Mycorrhizal fungi were linking plants into communities, not just individuals growing side by side, but systems responding together, adapting, defending, healing. Some call it the wood wide web, a clever phrase, but the truth is stranger. Unlike the internet, the fungal network does not separate user and provider. It is the platform, the messenger, the memory, and the mind. It stores information in its structure, responds to damage, and reshapes itself in real time. It remembers where nutrients were found. It reinforces connections that are used frequently, lets others wither. It is not a brain, but it behaves like one. And yet, this intelligence has no center, no command, no consciousness as we know it. It is distributed, emergent, like thought without a thinker. The trees do not know they are part of a network. The fungi do not plan. And still, together, they create something larger than themselves. A forest that learns, that remembers, that communicates in silence. The complexity is staggering. Some fungi form partnerships with just a few plant species. Others can connect hundreds. Some networks span only meters. Others stretch across entire groves, linking dozens of trees in subtle, shifting arrangements. These mycorrhizal webs grow constantly, dissolving old paths and building new ones, adapting to drought, disease, competition. They shift based on seasons, on rainfall, on the age and needs of the forest itself. Nothing is static. Everything listens. And like any system, it can be disturbed. Clear-cutting a forest doesn't just remove the trees, it shatters the fungal network that held them together. The threads dry out, the signals stop. The memory of the forest where water once pooled, where danger once came, is lost. Even when trees are replanted, the web beneath may take decades to regrow. The new forest rises on broken foundations, slower, lonelier, more vulnerable. But if a patch of mycelium survives, it can help. It can reconnect, inoculate new roots, rebuild the circuitry of cooperation. Sometimes, old stumps, long since leafless and bare, remain alive because the network continues to feed them. A ghost of the tree, still breathing quietly beneath the surface, kept alive by the generosity of neighbors and the persistence of the fungal web. It makes you wonder what else is happening beneath your feet, what else grows in silence, what lives and learns in places we do not look. The internet of the forest is not made of metal or light, it is made of life. A vast, ancient intelligence that cannot speak but still says something about connection, about support, about the unseen forces that bind a world together. And as you rest, you are not so different. You, too, are wired into networks you cannot fully see. Biological, emotional, ecological. You carry bacterial colonies in your gut, neurons in your skin, electromagnetic fields that shift as you sleep. You are connected, whether you notice or not. So, let the idea settle in. Let it root into the quiet of your mind. That somewhere, beneath moss and root, beneath stone and soil, there is a whisper of thought running through the earth, a signal passed from root to root, tree to tree, life to life, slow, silent, steady, a forest, dreaming itself alive. In the humid stillness of the jungle, where every leaf seems to twitch with hidden life, a single spore drifts through the air like dust. It is weightless, almost thoughtless, waiting for a body to become its stage. Below, an ant patrols the undergrowth, focused, alert, unaware of the story about to unfold inside its own skin. The spore finds it, clings to it, burrows in. This is not infection in the way we usually imagine it. This is choreography, a quiet, ruthless takeover. The spore of Ophiocordyceps, known to most as the zombie fungus, does not simply kill its host, it rewrites it. Once inside the ant's body, it begins to grow, threading itself through muscle, curling around nerves, creeping toward the brain. But it doesn't destroy the brain, not right away. It hijacks it. The ant begins to behave strangely. It leaves its colony, climbing vegetation it would usually avoid. Higher and higher it goes, as if drawn by a string, until it reaches a very particular height, just a few inches off the ground, precisely where temperature and humidity are ideal for the fungus to thrive. And then, in one final act not its own, the ant clamps its jaws onto a leaf's underside and waits. It stays there, frozen, while the fungus consumes it from within. The body dies, but the fungus is just getting started. A stalk erupts from the back of the ant's head, growing slowly, steadily, until it splits open and releases new spores into the air, ready to fall again, like ash, and begin the cycle anew. It's real. It's horrifying. It's beautiful. And it is astonishingly precise. Each species of cordyceps fungus targets only one or a few specific hosts. One type infects ants. Another targets cicadas. Others go after beetles, spiders, moths. Evolution has shaped these fungi like keys, each one cut to fit a particular lock. Their spores don't just kill, they alter behavior with exactitude, turning an ordinary insect into a vehicle, a vessel, a platform for reproduction. The precision is almost surgical. The fungus doesn't damage the ant's vital systems until the moment is right. It preserves what it needs, disables what it doesn't. It controls without destroying, at least not immediately. This is not some wild, chaotic force of nature. It is directed, specific, like a whisper that takes hold behind the eyes. To us, it feels like fiction, like something invented for horror stories or science fiction. But in the world of fungi, it is simply biology, a strategy, a method of propagation honed over millennia in the damp, shadowed places of the world. What we call zombie fungi are not monsters. They are organisms solving the oldest problem life has ever faced: how to spread, how to continue, how to use what is available. And what's available is everything. Some species of cordyceps can even distinguish between their target and close lookalikes, ignoring similar insects while pursuing only their preferred host. That level of specificity is rare in the natural world, where most predators and parasites are opportunistic. But cordyceps is not content with chance. It waits. It selects. It chooses the perfect body to inhabit, and then turns that body into a cathedral of its own design. From a distance, it might seem like simple brutality, but up close, there is something eerily elegant about it. The way the fungus emerges, slender and dark, from the corpse of the insect, often adorned with tiny droplets of moisture that shimmer in the light. The way it positions the dead body in the perfect microclimate for spore release. The way the forest floor beneath becomes seeded with the possibility of new life, even as one life ends. It is parasitism, yes, but it is also creation, not of beauty in the traditional sense, but of complexity, of adaptation, of strange, relentless ingenuity, and cordyceps is only one example. There are other fungi that manipulate behavior, fungi that infect flies and make them die upside down so their spores fall from their bellies like rain, fungi that turn caterpillars into desiccated husks with tiny mushrooms growing from their eyes, fungi that alter their hosts not just physically but neurologically, changing how they move, where they go, what they seek, not randomly, strategically, with purpose. This kind of manipulation is rare in the animal kingdom. Viruses can do it, a few parasites, but fungi seem to have mastered it with an artistry that suggests something more than mere survival. It suggests patience, calculation, a long, slow evolution of mechanisms so refined they feel intentional, even if they are not. Nature doesn't plan, but fungi make it look as though something, somewhere, might be. And perhaps what unsettles us most is how close it feels. These aren't alien monsters. They're here, now, in the soil, in the air, on the wings of passing insects. Their spores drift invisibly, waiting for the next chapter. And while they don't infect humans, at least, not in these ways, the idea lingers that something so small could enter your body and not just harm it, but steer it, change what you want, where you go, who you become. For now, we watch from the outside, safe, fascinated, disturbed. We study them in labs and photograph their strange beauty, trying to understand how they work. But the truth is, they don't care if we understand them. Fungi don't need our stories, our metaphors, our awe. They grow where they can. They bloom where there is opportunity. They have always done this. And somewhere tonight, in a rainforest pulsing with rain and breath and movement, another ant begins to climb. In the deep, loamy stillness beneath a pine canopy, or the sudden burst of damp on a rotting log, there is a kind of quiet miracle repeating itself, over and over, across every inch of the natural world. A mushroom rises, modest, maybe, modest always. It doesn't roar into life. It doesn't stretch upward like a tree or open like a flower. It simply appears, a fruiting body summoned by the rhythm of decay and moisture, and from its gills or pores or frilled edges, it begins to release its spores, tiny, invisible bodies of intention and potential. A single mushroom can cast billions of them into the air, and most will never land in a place that offers even the chance of survival. They are carried by the lightest breeze, caught on the backs of beetles, swept into the feathers of birds or the fur of passing animals. They drift, sometimes aimlessly, sometimes strategically. Some are shot like microscopic bullets, flung from their parent body with startling force, catapulted into the air, in arcs so small we cannot see them, but so precise they could pass through the eye of a needle 1,000 times over. Others catch rides on raindrops or the sudden thump of footsteps. The world is full of motion, and spores ride all of it. But what makes spores extraordinary isn't just how many there are or how widely they travel. It's how stubbornly they endure, how fiercely they resist the end. While most living things bend under pressure, wilt under heat, collapse under radiation, or wither in the vacuum of space, spores hold on. They wait. They adapt. They survive. Fungal spores are among the most resilient forms of life we know. Some can remain dormant for years, even decades, until the right combination of moisture, temperature, and nutrients signals them to awaken. Others resist boiling temperatures, shrug off extreme cold, and endure levels of radiation that would shred the DNA of almost anything else alive. Scientists have sent spores into orbit, exposed them to the airless void beyond our atmosphere, and watched as they returned, not only intact, but ready to germinate. They are, in a sense, biological seeds, but tougher, smaller, stranger. Inside each spore is a quiet blueprint, curled tightly in on itself, a genetic map of how to become again. The spore protects that map with layers of hardened protein, thick coats that repel ultraviolet light, chemicals that bind water so tightly they can endure desiccation. Some spores even produce compounds that repair their DNA after damage, rebuilding themselves from within. It is not immortality, not in the strict sense, but it comes close. There are spores buried in permafrost and sealed in amber that have remained viable for thousands of years. Long after the organisms that spawned them have decayed into memory, the spores remain, like tiny promises never quite broken. They do not hunger, they do not breathe, they do not move, but they wait, perfectly, for a world that will let them live again. This endurance is not an accident, it's strategy. Fungi evolved in a world of chaos, fires, floods, seasons that shift without warning. The spore is an answer to that uncertainty. Why fight to survive the storm when you can ride it? Why perish with your host when you can drift far beyond it, unseen and untouched? And so the forest is filled with spores, not just near mushrooms, but everywhere. In the soil, in the air, in the spaces between your breath. A liter of outdoor air may contain thousands of fungal spores, even in places that seem clean and clear. They cling to curtains and windowsills, float in sunbeams, gather quietly in basements and beneath floorboards. You do not see them, you rarely feel them, but they are always there, waiting. Even their dispersal is elegant. Some fungi produce spores with microscopic fins or wings, shaped to glide through air for long distances. Others create puffballs that explode with a tap, releasing clouds so dense they look like smoke, though they are made of life. Some use insects, attracting them with scent or color, hitching a ride on legs or bellies or tongues. A few even rely on mammals, their spores surviving passage through the gut and being deposited, pre-fertilized, in rich soil. Every method is a story of innovation, of adaptation, of a kingdom that does not need speed or strength or size to persist. And perhaps that's what's most haunting about spores. Their power lies in their invisibility. They don't demand attention. They don't stake claims. They simply exist, everywhere, silent and innumerable. While we build and burn and bury, they float. While empires rise and fall, they wait. And when the world ends, they may be among the few things left to start again. In the quiet hours of the night, when stillness wraps itself around the world like fog, spores drift through the air above sleeping trees, over rooftops and rivers, through windows left just slightly ajar. Not dangerous, not sinister, just present, just possible. Each one carries a future folded so tightly into itself it weighs nothing, and still, it endures. There are nights in the forest when the darkness does not fully settle, when, long after the sun has gone and the stars have hidden behind cloud, the ground itself seems to flicker with a soft, impossible light. Not fire, not moonlight, but something stranger, older. A greenish glow, faint as breath, pulsing just beneath fallen leaves, curling around the base of stumps, threading through bark like veins beneath translucent skin. This is foxfire, the living lanterns of the woods, the quiet shimmer of bioluminescent fungi. It doesn't blaze, it doesn't flare, it glows the way memory does, the way a dream leaves its outline in the mind long after you've woken. Soft, steady, almost sacred. Long before anyone knew what fungi were, let alone how they worked, people noticed the glow. Travelers in ancient Japan called it kirinomitama, ghost lights among the mist. In Appalachian folklore, it was said that the woods whispered with spirit fire, signs of omens or ancestors walking just out of sight. Some believed foxfire marked the path of the dead. Others saw it as a forest's breath, visible only when the world held perfectly still. But the truth, as is often the case, is no less mysterious for being scientific. The glow comes from a reaction between an enzyme called luciferase and a pigment called luciferin, named, poetically, for the Latin word Lucifer, the light bringer. When oxygen joins the reaction, it releases energy in the form of cold light. No heat, no combustion. Just a low, steady radiance pulsing from the body of the fungus. The reasons are still debated. Some scientists believe the light attracts insects, helping the fungus spread its spores in the way flowers use color or scent. Others think it may deter predators or serve as a form of communication between colonies. There are fungi that glow only at certain times of day, or only in specific parts of their bodies. Some light up their gills, others shine from the mycelium underground. A few only glow when touched, like memories stirred into wakefulness. Roughly 90 species of fungi are known to produce light, scattered across the world from the luminous Panellus stypticus on decaying wood in North America, to Mycena chlorophyos blooming briefly and brightly in the humid nights of Southeast Asia. Most are small, unassuming things, pale and fragile, often missed in the daylight. But in the dark, they become something else entirely. Not just alive, but a light, like stars fallen into the undergrowth, and they have done this for millions of years. Fossil evidence suggests that bioluminescence in fungi may date back to the Cretaceous, when dinosaurs still walked through ferned valleys, and the nights were lit not just by moonlight, but by life itself. What it must have looked like: primeval forests glowing from within, tree trunks laced with emerald glimmers, spores drifting through air like stardust. Even now, there are places where you can see it. Deep in unlogged forests, in corners of the world where human light hasn't drowned out nature's softer signals. If you sit quietly enough and let your eyes adjust, you might see the glow begin to emerge, not all at once, but slowly, like breath rising in cold air. It doesn't demand attention, it waits to be noticed. And when it is, it changes the way you see everything. The forest at night is not dead, it is quietly alive, breathing and pulsing and unfolding in wavelengths most of us never think to look for. Bioluminescent fungi are reminders of that life doesn't always shout, that sometimes the most extraordinary things are also the most overlooked, that beauty doesn't require brilliance, only presence. There's something humbling about it. This light that asks for nothing, offers no spectacle, and yet continues unbothered, unburdened. It's easy to think of it as magical, and maybe in a way it is, not in the sense of wands or spells, but in the older sense, the deeper one, the kind of magic that lives in processes we do not fully understand, that persists in the soil, in rot, in quiet cycles of decay and renewal. Bioluminescent fungi are not rare, but they are elusive. You have to want to find them. You have to go into the dark and stay there, long enough for your eyes to soften, your breath to slow, your thoughts to settle into the rhythm of the woods. And then, if you're lucky, you'll see the glow, not dazzling, not showy, just there, like the heartbeat of the earth, made visible for a moment. You might never look at darkness the same way again. In the dim underworld of the forest, where light seldom touches the soil, and the air is thick with the scent of decay, something is breathing. It doesn't have lungs, it doesn't have blood, but it breathes all the same. Slow, steady, essential. It inhales oxygen, it exhales carbon dioxide, and it has been doing this for millions of years, not in mimicry of us, but in parallel. Mushrooms are not plants. They do not photosynthesize. They do not drink in sunlight and release oxygen into the atmosphere. Instead, they operate on a rhythm far closer to our own. They take in oxygen from the air around them and release carbon dioxide as a byproduct of metabolizing their food, not for energy drawn from the sun, but from matter that has died, broken down, softened. They are recyclers, decomposers, and their respiration is a vital part of that role. When a mushroom grows, it does so not from the cap down, but from a vast hidden network, the mycelium that runs like invisible lace through soil and leaf litter. This underground lattice is alive, dynamic, always reaching, and every cell in that network breathes. The fungal body, though often unseen, is constantly exchanging gases with its environment. Oxygen fuels the breakdown of organic matter. Carbon dioxide seeps quietly into the soil, enriching it, feeding nearby roots, subtly shaping the atmosphere of the forest floor. In controlled environments, growers understand this intimately. Mushrooms won't thrive in just any conditions. They require fresh air, not just for temperature or humidity, but because they need oxygen to live. Too much carbon dioxide, and they grow long, spindly, distorted, stretching in search of better air. Not unlike us in a room with no windows, no circulation, no breeze. They know when the air is stale. They feel it, though not in lungs or noses. They feel it chemically, osmotically, at the cellular level, and they respond. There's something startling about this, if you let it settle. Mushrooms breathe the same air we do, the very same. Not metaphorically, literally. They use oxygen. They produce carbon dioxide. You could sit beside a mushroom in a closed room, and it would compete with you for breath. Not aggressively, not dangerously, but quietly, persistently. Two living things, side by side, drawing on the same resource to keep going. We're not used to thinking of fungi as alive in that way. Not in the animal way, not in the mammalian way. We see plants and we know they're living, but their breathing is different, reversed, almost poetic. They exhale what we inhale. We call that a partnership, a balance. But mushrooms don't fit into that symmetry. They disrupt it, or maybe they complete it. They are not here to feed us oxygen. They are here to consume, to metabolize, to transform. And isn't that what breathing is? A transformation of air into motion, of oxygen into energy, of the invisible into something you can use. Every breath we take is a kind of quiet combustion, a fire so small and controlled it never burns, but always warms. Fungi carry that same fire, carried deep in damp wood, in rotting bark, in the softening skin of fallen fruit. Their respiration is not a song of sunlight, but of decay, a hymn to what was, and still it brings life. In certain caves, mushrooms grow where no light ever reaches. They feed on the carcasses of insects or on nutrient-rich animal waste. They breathe the slow air of the deep places. In laboratories, mycologists coax fungi into growth chambers, feeding them grains and heat, adjusting the air to match what their bodies expect. The CO2 must be monitored, the oxygen must flow. A delicate dance, always invisible, always vital. It makes you wonder about the unseen air around you, the way it moves, the way it's used, the way so many things are drawing from it at once. We tend to think of breathing as a human thing, or at least an animal thing, something with a chest, with movement, with sound. But the forest is full of breath, not just rustling leaves or blowing wind, but breath as an act of metabolism, breath as necessity. Mushrooms breathe, the soil breathes, the roots, the bacteria, the insects, the worms, every inch alive with exchange. And in that exchange, something else happens. A reminder, maybe, that life isn't always about growth or reaching toward the sun. Sometimes it's about breaking things down, making space, returning what was taken. Mushrooms breathe because they must, but their breath carries meaning. It's the exhale of endings, the inhale of transformation. You may never hear it. You may never feel it. But it's there. In the quiet corners, in the forgotten logs, in the cool earth beneath your feet. A different kind of breath, but breath all the same. Somewhere between the folds of ordinary thought, where language slows and logic loosens its grip, there is a threshold. And beyond that threshold, strange colors bloom behind closed eyes. Time stops behaving, the world rearranges itself, and in the silence that follows, a voice not loud, not external, but unmistakably clear says, "Look, this is the terrain of psilocybin mushrooms, fungi that do not feed the body, but alter the mind. Not through poison, not through dream, but through chemistry so precise it slips past every barrier we've built between sense and self. For thousands of years, they've been taken in shadowed groves and candlelit temples, crushed into powders, stirred into brews, placed with reverence on tongues. Their effect is not one of distortion, but of unveiling, not an escape, but an arrival. And the journey, if you let it, is inward. The molecule at the heart of it is psilocybin, which the body swiftly converts into psilocin, a compound that locks into serotonin receptors in the brain like a forgotten key. When it turns, everything shifts. The default mode network, an intricate web of neural connections responsible for our sense of self, our internal narrator, our constant background hum of thought goes quiet. Patterns long hardened by repetition begin to melt. Rigid thoughts become rivers. The boundaries between subject and object, self and world, begin to blur, and in that loosening, the mind opens. For some, it opens to wonder, a deep, oceanic feeling of unity with the universe. Trees breathe, rocks hum. Every blade of grass seems charged with significance. For others, it opens to memory, the past unfolding in intimate detail, sometimes painful, sometimes healing. And for others still, it opens to visions that have no name, geometries that unfold into themselves, impossible colors, entities that communicate without words, all of it passing like weather across the sky of the mind. It's not always beautiful. It can be frightening, even overwhelming. But many who have walked that path return with the same sentiment, that something true happened, something beyond language, beyond thought, something that whispered, not in words, but in feeling, that the world is more connected, more alive than we had imagined, that we too are part of it, not separate, not observing, but within. This knowledge is not new. Long before scientists mapped the pathways of psilocin in the brain, ancient cultures were listening to mushrooms speak. In Mesoamerica, sacred mushrooms were known as tionanacatl, the flesh of the gods. They were consumed in ceremony, used to invoke visions, to speak with ancestors, to receive guidance from the spirit world. These weren't recreational encounters. They were sacraments, portals to wisdom too vast for daily thought. Even today, echoes of these rituals remain. In the hills of Oaxaca, mushroom ceremonies are still held under the guidance of shamans, sung into motion by chants and candlelight. The experience is not framed as hallucination, but communion, a meeting of worlds. And now, after decades of silence and stigma, science is circling back. In carefully controlled settings, psilocybin is being tested for its ability to treat depression, PTSD, anxiety, and addiction. The results are staggering. People describe a single session as more profound than years of therapy, not because the drug erases pain, but because it opens a space where pain can be seen, understood, and finally released. Brain scans show something remarkable. Under the influence of psilocybin, areas of the brain that rarely communicate begin to fire together. New connections form, old ones loosen. It's as if the mind is freed from its usual pathways and allowed to explore new terrain. Creativity flourishes, perspective shifts, And often, in the stillness that follows, there is a lasting sense of peace, a reduction in fear, a softening of self. We tend to think of consciousness as a fixed light, on or off, here or not. But mushrooms reveal its fluidity, its depth. They remind us that perception is not passive, but chosen, that what we see is shaped by what we expect to see, and that, with the right key, even the walls of the self can become transparent. Still, these experiences demand respect. They are not toys, not shortcuts. They are tools. And like any tool, they can wound if mishandled. Set and setting matter. Intention matters. Just as fire can warm or destroy, these mushrooms can heal or disorient. But when approached with care, with reverence, they can reveal landscapes within us that most will never see. What's most curious is how simple the mushroom seems. A small fleshy cap, a narrow stalk, grown quietly on dung or soil or rotting wood. And yet, within it, the capacity to dissolve the self, to show you a world that feels more real than the one you left behind, to hold up a mirror not just to your face, but to your soul. That such a thing grows wild, unguarded, unannounced, waiting only to be found, is perhaps the strangest fact of all. That nature, in its dark and tangled corners, holds not just food and decay, but glimpses of the divine. And maybe that's the truest gift of the psychedelic mushroom, not the visions, not the altered states, but the reminder that the door to mystery is never far, that it can grow from the forest floor, that it can fit in the palm of your hand, that it can open, not into escape, but into wonder. On the surface of stone, where the wind strips away everything soft and the sun burns without apology, something impossibly patient is growing. It does not move. It does not flower. It does not chase the light. And yet, year by year, inch by slow inch, it spreads, pale, green, deep orange, crusted gray like ash or paint or cracked skin, lichens, clinging to the bones of the world like they've always been there, because in many ways they have. But a lichen isn't what it looks like. It isn't a moss. It isn't a plant. It isn't even a boss, single organism. It's a collaboration, a truce, a secret handshake between species. At its core is a fungus hollow, hungry, incapable of making its own food. Alone, it would starve. But into that empty structure comes something miraculous. Algae, or sometimes cyanobacteria, tiny photosynthetic life forms that know how to turn light into sugar. They move in, make themselves at home, and begin to feed their host. In return, they get shelter, safety from drying winds, a fortress of hyphae. The result is not one thing or the other, but both, fused so completely that they form something new. It's not symbiosis the way we're taught in school. It's deeper than that. Lichens are not simply two partners living side by side. They are ecosystems shrunk to the scale of a single growth. Communities within communities. The fungus may wrap itself around multiple species of algae. Bacteria may join the mix, adding color, structure, even scent. Every lichen is a microcosm, an agreement between species to survive together in places none of them could manage alone. And they choose the hardest places: cliffs, boulders, barren trees, roof tiles, Arctic tundras, Antarctic deserts, nuclear test sites, outer space. Lichens have survived complete desiccation, UV bombardment, freezing, thawing, vacuum. They endure not in spite of these extremes, but because of the way their parts cooperate. The algae or cyanobacteria photosynthesize when light is present. The fungus protects them when it isn't. When it rains, they wake. When it dries, they sleep. Entire metabolic processes go dormant for decades, only to spark back to life with a single drop of water. Not broken, not dead, just paused. You can find them anywhere, once you learn how to look. On fence posts and gravestones, on the bark of old oaks, on glacial rocks so ancient they've forgotten the feel of green. Their colors shift with the weather, with the light, with their mood. They are often overlooked, mistaken for rot, or stains, or the slow work of time. But they are builders, engineers of soil. In the beginning, when Earth was still cooling and life had only begun to leave the sea, it was lichens that took the first steps onto stone. Their acids broke down rock, their bodies trapped dust, their deaths made dirt. They were the first gardeners, planting nothing but preparing everything. And still they persist, quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. Some lichens are thousands of years old, growing less than a millimeter per year. Others arrive overnight in spores so small they ride the breeze like pollen. Their lives are measured not in days or seasons, but in eras. They have witnessed glaciers advance and recede. They have watched continents drift. They have survived through silence and catastrophe alike. What makes them even stranger is how little we understand them. For centuries, they were misclassified first as plants, then as fungi. It wasn't until the 1,860 seconds that scientists began to suspect the truth, that these crusts and fronds and threads were not singular, but plural, not individuals, but alliances. Even now, our understanding continues to evolve. Some lichens contain 3 or more symbiotic partners. Some appear genetically identical but function completely differently depending on their environment. Some fungi can form completely different lichens depending on which algae they partner with, like a song that changes meaning depending on who sings it. They resist easy definition. They blur the line between organism and community, between biology and metaphor, and maybe that's why they're so compelling, because they suggest something quietly radical. That survival isn't about strength or speed or dominance. It's about connection, about finding what you lack in someone else and offering what you can in return. In a world that rewards independence, lichens are a testament to interdependence. They are reminders that even on the edges, especially on the edges, life finds a way, not by going it alone, but by going together. So next time you pass a patch of color clinging to stone, pause. Look closer. What you're seeing isn't decay, it's design. A living treaty written in fungus and light. A message from the deep time of the earth, still being whispered in the cracks of walls and the bark of trees. And it says, "Together, we endure." Far above the earth, where the sky fades into vacuum and sunlight slices through the dark in sharp, cold beams, there is no soil, no rain, no forest to anchor breath or body. And yet, even there, even in that strange edge between atmosphere and abyss, the tendrils of Earth's oldest recyclers are reaching outward. Mycelium, the invisible network beneath the mushroom, the part we almost never see, has become something unexpected, a candidate for the future of life in space. It seems improbable at first, a thing of rot and forest floors, of damp logs and autumn leaves, now studied under sterile lights and zero gravity. But when you trace the qualities of fungi, resilient, adaptable, efficient, the idea begins to take root. Fungi don't just break things down, they build, they shield, they endure. Qualities that are quietly revolutionary when nothing on the surface of Mars was built to keep us alive. NASA researchers and designers have begun to look to mycelium not as a curiosity, but as infrastructure, a kind of living material that could, one day, grow itself into homes on other planets. The vision is almost mythic in its simplicity. Send a lightweight scaffold to Mars, add water, and allow dormant fungal spores to awaken and begin weaving themselves into dense, fibrous walls. No need to haul concrete across millions of miles. No need for heavy machinery. Just life. Unfolding, growing, strengthening like a coral reef, but terrestrial and purposeful. These fungal structures aren't just theoretical. Prototypes have already been built here on Earth, domes and panels, and shelters made from pressed, cultivated mycelium, strong enough to support weight, to insulate, to withstand heat, and perhaps most importantly, to shield. Fungi have a natural resistance to radiation. Some species not only survive in radioactive environments, they seem to thrive. On the walls of the Chernobyl reactor, certain melanized fungi absorb radiation like sunlight, converting it into chemical energy, a kind of photosynthesis in reverse. It's a strange, eerie adaptation. But in space, where cosmic rays pose one of the greatest threats to human biology, it may be the key to long-term survival. Imagine, then, a habitat on Mars, not built, but grown. Its walls layered with fungal networks that protect against solar flares. Its temperature stabilized by the dense, spongy weave of mycelial tissue. Inside, perhaps, the same fungi are being cultivated to filter air, recycle waste, even help grow food. Not just a material, but a partner, alive, responsive, evolving alongside its human inhabitants. The closed-loop systems that sustain astronauts are already deeply dependent on biology, hydroponics, algae, microbial filters. Fungi add another dimension to this ecosystem: decomposition. They can break down what nothing else can, convert what's used into something usable again. And in space, where every gram must be accounted for, where nothing can be wasted, that efficiency becomes not just useful, but vital. It's not hard to see why this idea feels both futuristic and ancient. Fungi were some of the first complex organisms to colonize land. They thrived in the harsh, post-volcanic earth. Before the first trees, before flowers, before insects buzzed through the air. They survived extinction events. They adapted through ice ages, through droughts, through fire. To imagine them stepping onto Mars with us is not so much science fiction as a continuation of their long, unstoppable reach. They won't do it dramatically. There will be no mushroom forests blooming under Martian skies, but the mycelium will spread in silence, binding and weaving, one cell at a time. A slow, deliberate architecture, a biology of patience, like frost growing on glass, but in reverse building, not breaking. And the symbolism is hard to ignore. In our quest to explore the stars, we may not bring only machines and metal and flame. We may bring rot, not decay as destruction, but as transformation, a reminder that life, in all its stubborn forms, survives by recycling itself, that we are never separate from the systems that sustain us, that even on another planet beneath a red sky, we may find ourselves sheltered in the body of something that once grew in forests long vanished from Earth. There is something humbling in that, something beautiful, that the solution to one of our greatest technological challenges might come not from synthetic polymers or nuclear shielding, but from something soft, something ancient, something alive. And if one day you step into a habitat on Mars and run your hand along the wall, it might feel warm, slightly rough, like pressed soil or bark. You may not see the threads that hold it together, the fine mesh of cells growing in darkness, but they'll be there, breathing with you, protecting you. A home made not by dominance over nature, but by partnership with it. A reminder that the future, no matter how far it travels, may still be rooted in the deep, slow wisdom of Earth. In the quiet shadow of a forest, where fallen logs sink slowly into the earth and the air smells of damp soil and rain-soaked bark, something miraculous is always happening. Not dramatic, not loud, but relentless. Mycelium threads its way through the decay, reading the chemistry of what's left behind. It doesn't recoil. It doesn't turn away. It moves toward the rot, toward the poison, toward the broken things, and begins to eat. This is the nature of fungi. They are not destroyers, but restorers. Decomposition, after all, is only transformation with patience. And in a world increasingly filled with the unnatural plastics that never break down, oil that chokes the ocean, chemicals we no longer know how to undo. Fungi are quietly offering a solution. They don't shout, they grow, they consume, and in the process, they cleanse. The practice is called mycormediation, using fungi to heal damaged environments, to digest waste that resists every other method, to pull toxins from the soil and return something cleaner. The principle is simple, but profound. What we bury, they unmake. What we spill, they filter. What we thought was permanent, they quietly erase. And it's not theory. It's happening now, in real fields, with real fungi, led by people like Paul Stamets, a mycologist who sees mushrooms not just as food or medicine, but as an ecological toolkit we've only just begun to understand. In one experiment, oyster mushrooms were placed on diesel-contaminated soil. Weeks later, the soil was not only free of toxins, it was blooming. Insects returned. Plants took root. What had been considered dead space became a cradle for life. It turns out mushrooms don't discriminate between organic decay and industrial waste. To them, hydrocarbons are just another feast. Their enzymes break apart complex molecules, dismantle them into smaller, manageable forms, and then absorb what's useful. Some species can neutralize heavy metals. Others can digest pesticides. There are even fungi that feed on polyurethane, the spongy plastic found in foams and cushions, and keep growing. In one test, a strain of Pestilodiopsis from the Amazon was shown to survive in a sealed environment, eating nothing but plastic, without oxygen. It didn't just tolerate the waste it lived on it, in landfills, in the deepest cracks of urban decay. That kind of resilience begins to look like salvation. And it doesn't stop at plastic. Mushrooms have been trained to consume cigarette butts, breaking down the cellulose acetate that would otherwise linger for decades. They've been deployed after oil spills, their mycelial mats laid across blackened shores like gauze on a wound. They've been used to treat chemical runoff, to restore logging sites, to pull toxins from mining land. Each time, the story is the same. The fungi arrive, spread, digest, and leave behind not destruction, but renewal. There is something deeply humbling in this, that the answer to our most modern problems might lie in something so old, so small, so overlooked, that the same organisms we've stepped over in forests for millennia may hold the key to reversing our deepest damage. They don't operate like us. They don't act in haste. Mycelium moves slowly, sensing its environment through chemical gradients, choosing its path not with urgency, but with purpose. It forms networks that remember, that adapt, that change based on what they've absorbed before. They are, in many ways, the nervous system of the soil, feeling, processing, responding, quiet intelligence woven into the earth. And maybe that's what makes their power so quietly radical. They don't need factories. They don't need combustion. They don't need rare metals mined from the bones of the planet. They need only time and decay, and the freedom to do what they've always done, turn death into life. This vision of a fungal future is not utopian. It's earthy, grounded. But it suggests something extraordinary, that restoration doesn't have to mean erasure, that healing doesn't have to come from above. It can rise from below. It can grow in the cracks. It can emerge from the mycelial web already beneath our feet, waiting for its chance. And so perhaps the work ahead isn't to invent something new, but to listen, to make space, to stop covering the soil in concrete and give these ancient recyclers the room they need to work. Imagine cities with fungal biofilters lining drainage systems, catching toxins before they reach the river. Imagine mushroom-based insulation in homes that also purifies the air. Imagine disaster zones where mycelium is deployed as the first responder, not just to clean, but to begin the slow rebuilding of life. It won't happen overnight. Fungi don't operate on our schedules, but they are tireless, and they are thorough. There is an old wisdom in the forest, a way of seeing the world not as something to be used, but something to be tended. Mushrooms remember that. Even when we forget, they keep cleaning, keep growing, keep turning waste into soil, and soil into growth, and growth into something more than survival. They do not ask for recognition, only space, only time, only the chance to finish the work they began long before we ever arrived. Beneath the forest floor of eastern Oregon, something vast is breathing, not in the way we do, with lungs or rhythms or the rise and fall of a chest, but in pulses of chemical exchange, in quiet expansion, in the constant, invisible negotiation of life and decay. There are trees here, of course tall, noble, stoic, in the way only trees can be, but beneath them, stretching out across the soil in patterns that mimic veins or neural pathways or ancient rivers, lives a presence older and larger than any of them. It's not a myth, it's not a metaphor, it's a fungus. Armillaria ostoii, commonly called the honey fungus, is known for its clusters of pale golden mushrooms that sometimes appear on stumps and rotting logs. But those mushrooms are only the fruit, brief and seasonal, emerging for a few days like sparks from something much deeper. The real body lies beneath the surface, woven into the ground itself, a sprawling mycelial network, quietly growing through roots and soil and stone. Scientists discovered it not through sight, but through genetic sampling. They took pieces from different trees across a forest, miles apart, and tested the fungi entwined with their roots. What they found was astonishing. The same DNA sequence, repeating again and again over thousands of samples, across more than 3.5 miles of forest. One organism, one individual, not a colony, not a species, a singular life form living underground in silence, older than the oldest trees that shade it. It is, as far as we know, the largest living organism on Earth. But it doesn't tower, it doesn't move, it doesn't cry out or bloom or announce itself in any dramatic way. It seeps, it listens, it grows slowly, maybe just a few centimeters each year, but over centuries, those centimeters become forests, those years become legends. Some estimates say it could be over 2,000 years old, maybe even more. We don't know for sure, because its history isn't written in bark rings or stone layers. It's written in the hush between roots, in the slow disassembly of trees from the inside out. The honey fungus is a decomposer, but also a parasite. It infiltrates trees silently, sapping their strength, hollowing them from within. And when a tree dies, it doesn't go to waste. The fungus consumes it completely, folding the nutrients back into the soil, into itself. There's a kind of brutal elegance to it, a cycle of life and death carried out not with cruelty, but with purpose. To the Armillaria, there is no villainy in decay, only opportunity, only balance. It raises a strange and wondrous question. What does it mean to be alive when you exist not as a body, but as a field? When your edges are too large to see, when your thoughts, if you have them, are scattered across thousands of acres? Is this one creature, or something stranger? A kind of consciousness stretched thin across the land, too slow for us to hear, too vast for us to hold. When we think of life, we often think of faces, of motion, of hearts beating within defined boundaries, but the earth has always been home to other kinds of life, slower, wider, older, life that doesn't speak in sound but in chemistry, that doesn't rush but waits, that doesn't bloom once but endlessly, in tiny silent actions repeated over millennia. The Armillaria in Oregon has outlived empires. It has seen the land change around it, seen fires rage and seeds fall and animals come and go. It has known seasons like we know minutes. It has never needed to migrate or flee or reinvent itself. It simply continued, grew, endured, and perhaps that's the most extraordinary thing, not its size, not its age, but its constancy. In a world that changes constantly, fractures, accelerates, forgets, this organism has persisted in the same quiet way, doing the same quiet work beneath our feet. We walk above it without knowing. Camp, build, hike, and rest on ground that is, quite literally, alive. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. Alive in the most real biological sense. Alive and vast and present, even if invisible. The mushrooms that rise are not beginnings, but whispers, signals from the depths, moments of visibility in a lifetime spent underground. It reminds us that size is not always spectacle, that greatness can be buried, that the largest things in the world are sometimes the ones we've never seen, and that even now, even in the age of satellites and sensors and constant observation, there are wonders we still overlook. The forest in Oregon holds one such wonder. It is not marked by any sign or fence or monument, just a living quiet, stretching mile after mile, still growing, still breathing, still here. In the heart of the forest, mycelium grows without instruction. It spreads in threads, branching and curling with a kind of quiet intelligence, not building in the way humans do, but becoming. It doesn't stack or pour or hammer. It emerges. It finds a shape by listening to moisture, to temperature, to what is decaying nearby. It responds with presence, and what it creates is more than structure. It is memory. It is network. It is alive. Now, imagine this, not just underfoot in the woods, but in your walls, in your roof, in the bricks of your home. Imagine a house not made, but grown. This is not fantasy. It's happening. Scientists and architects are learning to cultivate mycelium, the living root-like threads of fungi, as a construction material. In dark, damp conditions, they feed it agricultural waste, sawdust, corn husks, straw. The mycelium consumes the matter and binds it together into dense, foam-like blocks. When the growth is complete, they halt it with heat, preserving the shape. What's left is a material as light as styrofoam, stronger than concrete by weight, and astonishingly resistant to fire. It doesn't burn. It chars slowly. It insulates. It breathes. It returns to the earth without a trace. Mycelium bricks don't come from a quarry. They don't leave scars in the land or smoke in the air. They grow in silence, in weeks, not decades. They don't require welding or toxic glues. They self-assemble. And though they no longer live once heat-treated, their very nature remains organic, biodegradable, and intimately in tune with the environment from which they came. It's a different kind of architecture, one that doesn't impose itself on the world, but participates in it. Structures born not out of domination, but collaboration, as if the building itself remembers the forest it came from. The implications are staggering. In a time when construction is one of the largest contributors to global carbon emissions, here is a material that captures carbon as it grows, that repurposes waste, that requires no mining, no smelting, no blast furnaces. In a world drowning in plastic, here is a replacement that leaves no trace. When you're finished with a mycelium product, you don't throw it away. You compost it. You return it to the cycle it came from. There are already prototypes of furniture, packaging, acoustic tiles, even burial coffins, all grown, not manufactured. There are companies crafting entire pavilions out of mycelium blocks, curving domes and walls that look like something out of a dream, soft-edged and pale, textured like coral or bone. These buildings don't gleam like glass or steel. They don't tower. They invite. They breathe. They feel, somehow, more like places that belong. And perhaps that's the deeper shift. Not just a change in materials, but a change in mindset. To build with mycelium is to embrace slowness, cooperation, and impermanence. These structures won't last forever. That's the point. They last as long as they're needed, then rejoin the earth. They decay with grace. They accept their return. There's something poetic in that, in the idea that the buildings of the future might not stand forever as monuments to permanence, but instead move through the world the way trees do, rooted, responsive, temporary, and then gone, not erased, returned. It also redefines what it means to be a builder, to grow materials instead of extracting them, to shape the environment not by cutting it apart, but by listening to its rhythms, to let nature design alongside us. Even the process of growing these bricks feels different. It's less about control, more about stewardship. The mycelium is guided, not forced. It's given space, the right temperature, the right moisture. It's encouraged to form a certain shape, but it chooses how to grow. It decides the path of least resistance. It fills the mold on its own terms. It's easy to think of buildings as fixed things, as shelters against nature. But fungi remind us that there's another way, structures that don't resist the world, but harmonize with it. Buildings that don't fight weather, but adapt. Materials that don't persist forever, but change with time. In this way, mycelium becomes not just a tool, but a teacher, a quiet architect, showing us how to think differently about permanence, about waste, about what it means to leave a mark without causing a scar. You could walk into a room made of mycelium and not know it. It would be cool to the touch, slightly fibrous, smelling faintly of wood and earth. It wouldn't hum with the cold sterility of concrete or the sharpness of metal. It would feel grounded, familiar, like something that has always been here, just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. And maybe that's true. Maybe the buildings of the future aren't new at all. Maybe they're ancient patterns, rediscovered. The forest has always known how to build without waste, how to balance strength with softness, how to shelter life without suffocating it. Now, we're learning to follow its lead, one brick at a time, one thread at a time, not built, but grown. When something dies in the forest, it doesn't disappear, it changes. Slowly, invisibly, it becomes part of something else. A fallen tree doesn't vanish overnight. Its bark softens, its limbs slump, and deep in the cracks of its once rigid form, a quiet undoing begins. Not destruction, but transformation. This is the work of fungi, the ancient recyclers, the silent stewards of endings. They arrive with no fanfare, no violence, just threads, soft, white, nearly weightless, and impossibly strong. Mycelium, winding its way through what once lived, breaking it down, taking it apart, piece by piece. Fungi do not mourn, they do not rush. They simply do what they've done for hundreds of millions of years. They return things. What they touch doesn't vanish. It becomes soil, becomes breath, becomes root and leaf, and eventually, again, life. Where rot begins, so too does renewal. This is the promise at the heart of decay, that nothing ends for good, that every death feeds something else, that in every fall there is a beginning, even if it arrives wearing the scent of earth and the hush of time. It's easy to think of death as a stop, a wall, but fungi know it as a door, a process, a movement not away, but into the next chapter of matter, of energy, of participation in the living world. Every decomposing body, be it tree or creature, is a story in translation. And fungi are the translators. They take what once was and help it become what will be. They don't discriminate. They take the smallest fallen leaf and the mightiest oak. They take the bird, the beetle, the bear. Each is reduced not to nothingness, but to usefulness. Molecules that might have sat still for eons are nudged back into circulation. Locked carbon is released. Nutrients are offered like gifts to the soil. And from this generosity, life blooms again. Without fungi, forests would drown in their own dead. Leaves would pile into eternity. Bones would linger, sterile and stubborn. The cycle would stall. But fungi prevent that. They keep things moving. Quietly, they keep the world alive. Some fungi glow, some hunt, some heal. but none are more essential than the ones who simply take what has fallen and carry it forward. It's a kind of grace, really, this willingness to work in shadows, to labor unseen, beneath logs, inside the forgotten corners of the world, to do the sacred work of decomposition, knowing no one is watching, knowing that even those who benefit may never understand. But we are beginning to understand. Slowly, we are remembering. Not long ago, the idea of using fungi in human death was radical. Burials were about preservation, fighting rot, resisting decay. Bodies embalmed and sealed in hardwood, surrounded by synthetic materials and concrete vaults, suspended in stillness for decades. It was a strange denial of the very earth we come from, as if the end of life meant pulling away from life entirely. But now, some are choosing differently. The infinity burial suit is made from mushroom spores and biodegradable thread. It's worn like a second skin, laced with the potential for return. When the body is buried, the spores awaken. They grow into mycelium that digests the body, neutralizes toxins, and folds every molecule back into the ecosystem. It's not a denial of death, it's a partnership with it. There's also human composting, or natural organic reduction, a process where bodies are placed in a vessel with wood chips, straw, and microbial life. Over weeks, the body is transformed into rich soil, indistinguishable from the forest floor. Families can use this soil to plant trees, to nourish gardens, to hold a piece of their loved one not in stone, but in bloom. It's not grotesque, it's not morbid, it's honest, beautiful. Returning to what we've always been, part of the whole. To become soil is not to vanish, it's to join, to spread out into trillions of particles, each carrying the memory of breath and blood and thought, now given freely to the roots of the world. To live again in the fruit of a tree, the curl of a fern, the beating wing of a bird that eats its berries. The fungi make this possible. They are not the end, they are the bridge. They remind us that nothing is wasted, that the forest remembers its dead not with gravestones, but with blossoms, that life persists by letting go. Even now, beneath your feet, they are at work, taking what has fallen and making space for what's to come. They do not grieve as we do, but in their endless service, there is a kind of reverence, a devotion to the pattern, a faith that even in death, we matter. And maybe that's enough. To know that one day, we will feed something, that the last gift we give might be the richest, that the end, when it comes, will not be an erasure, but a return, a soft falling back into the hands of the world. In the dim understory of a forest, far beneath the rustle of leaves and the call of birds, something is listening, not with ears, not with a brain, but with an intelligence all its own. A web of mycelium, invisible to most eyes, stretches through the soil in tangled, reaching filaments. It feels the pressure of footsteps, the acidity of roots, the warmth of bodies. It senses, it remembers, it reacts. And slowly, question by question, the line between awareness and instinct begins to blur. For a long time, we didn't call this intelligence. We called it reaction, reflex, perhaps coincidence. Mushrooms were strange things that popped up overnight and vanished just as quickly, too alien to fit our neat categories. Plants grew, animals moved, mushrooms rotted. They were excluded from the systems we used to define life as we understood it. But the closer we look, the more these networks of fungal threads begin to resemble something eerily familiar. In one experiment, scientists placed oat flakes at the ends of a maze and watched as a slime mold, not a fungus exactly, but closely related, extended its tendrils, groping through the maze's corridors until it found the food. Then, astonishingly, it retracted its unnecessary branches and reinforced the shortest path, optimizing its network like a computer algorithm. It had no eyes, no neurons. and yet it solved the problem with efficiency rivaling our most elegant code. Fungi, too, demonstrate these behaviors. Mycelium explores its environment methodically, testing directions, adapting to obstacles. It shows preference, memory, avoidance. When repeatedly exposed to something harmful, like salt, it learns not to go there. When something nourishing is removed, it searches for a new route. And when it encounters the same terrain again, it responds faster, having retained some echo of experience. Not in synapses, but in structure. The memory lives in the shape of its body. This is not thought exactly, but it's not thought either. The mycelial web is decentralized. There is no command center, no mushroom mastermind. Each strand of hyphae is both an individual and a participant in the whole. Information travels through electrochemical pulses, much like neurons firing in the brain. Nutrients and signals flow in rhythm, responding to environmental cues in ways that mimic learning. When two trees connect to the same mycorrhizal network, they can exchange chemical messages, not just warnings of pests, but sugars, water, and stress signals. The fungus facilitates this, like a translator, or maybe a nervous system for the forest. Some researchers now refer to it as the wood wide web, not only because of its vastness, but because of the complexity of its exchanges. A beech tree in shade may receive carbon from a sunlit maple across the way, and both may repay that favor in drought or disease. The fungus benefits from the trade, taking its cut of the sugar, but it also mediates, rebalancing resources not with force, but with subtlety, as if it understands what each participant needs. And so we return to the question, can something without a brain be intelligent? Maybe intelligence was never about brains to begin with. Maybe it's about responsiveness, memory, adaptation. Maybe the mind is not confined to skulls, but emerges in whatever network can carry, signal, and change. In whatever system can remember what happened and do something differently next time. The human brain is a network. So is mycelium. Ours glows with electricity. Theirs hums through chemistry and water. But the result, in its quiet way, is surprisingly alike. There's even talk now of fungal computing using the natural logic of hyphal growth and reaction to build biological circuits. Instead of silicon chips, we'd use living filaments, not to replace our machines, but to mimic the slow, elegant power of nature's own information systems. Networks that self-heal, that adapt, that grow to meet the challenge. We used to imagine consciousness as a singular flame burning inside the skull of a human being, but perhaps it's more like spores scattered, persistent, capable of sprouting in many forms. Perhaps it doesn't belong solely to us. Perhaps it never did. If you walk through the forest at night and kneel down beside a fallen log, you might see it glowing faintly. With foxfire, that eerie green light emitted by some bioluminescent fungi. You might think of the neurons in your brain, sparking behind closed eyes as you dream. And you might wonder, who else is dreaming here? What thoughts are winding their way through the soil? What ancient mind is unfolding just below your feet? Not a mind like ours, something older, quieter, less concerned with names or boundaries, just sensation, pattern, response. A mind made not of bone, but of branching threads. A mind that has waited 1 billion years not to speak, but to listen. Long before we understood them, fungi healed us. Before we named them, before we isolated their molecules in sterile labs and folded them into capsules, they were already doing their quiet work, fighting infections, calming inflammation, easing the thresholds of pain. Long before microscopes or prescriptions, people knew. They watched which plants wilted slower after a mushroom-rich compost, which wounds closed faster when smeared with moss from shaded logs. There was no language for penicillin yet, but the intuition was there, nestled deep in the body's memory. Even now, the most powerful medicines we use in modern hospitals are borrowed not from chemistry, but from the forest floor. The mold that gave us penicillin was a kind of miracle discovered almost by accident, a bloom of blue-green softness that stopped bacteria in its tracks. It wasn't made in a factory. It was grown, gently, like a crop. A fungus that saved millions of lives, not with fire or force, but with a whisper. No further. That's enough. Let this life continue. Fungi don't cure because they care. They cure because it's in their nature. Their defense systems, honed over eons of surviving in close, moist quarters, produce compounds so potent that even our most stubborn pathogens struggle against them. Antibiotics, statins, immunosuppressants, these weren't invented. They were found, nestled in the hyphae of molds and mushrooms, waiting patiently for us to catch up. Cyclosporin, which makes organ transplants possible, was discovered in a Norwegian soil sample. Without it, the immune system would reject anything foreign. With it, a donated heart can keep beating in a new chest. A kidney can begin again. It's strange, when you think about it, how something that evolved to defend a fungus from competition could also become the reason two strangers' cells can coexist in peace. But fungi are like that, capable of contradiction, of generosity born from self-preservation. And then there are the statins, found first in Penicillium citrinum, lowering cholesterol, reducing heart attacks, reshaping the flow of blood through our bodies, not by brute force, but by rebalancing, by reminding the body how to manage itself. Of course, long before lab coats and clinical trials, people were already turning to fungi. Ancient herbalism leaned heavily on mushrooms, not just for food or ritual, but for healing. In the high mountains of China, cordyceps were collected for stamina and vitality. In Siberian forests, chaga was steeped into teas for immunity. In the Andes, puffballs were pressed into wounds to slow the bleeding. These weren't myths. They were early pharmacologies, passed down through observation and survival. Even now, traditional medicine knows things that science is still rediscovering. And as we move deeper into an age of resistance, where bacteria evolve faster than our drugs, many researchers are returning to fungi, not with arrogance, but with humility, looking to the deep catalog of chemical language they've built over millennia, hoping to find new solutions hidden in old growth. But the healing goes beyond molecules. Fungi interact with the immune system in ways we're only beginning to understand. Some, like reishi and turkey tail, seem to modulate our defenses, nudging overactive systems to calm down, urging underactive ones to wake up. They don't everyone override the body. They collaborate with it, listening, responding, balancing. Not a sword, but a scale. Lion's mane, another strange and beautiful mushroom, contains compounds that may stimulate nerve growth. In lab studies, it encourages the regeneration of brain cells. In humans, it's being studied for memory loss, anxiety, and cognitive repair. A fungus that might help the brain rebuild itself, not by forcing, but by inviting. And psilocybin, once dismissed as dangerous or recreational, is now being studied in some of the most rigorous mental health research of our time. In clinical trials, it's helping people with depression, PTSD, and addiction, not by numbing their pain, but by guiding them through it, by offering a temporary rewrite of the mind's deepest patterns, a new perspective from which healing can begin. It's strange, isn't it, that something that grows in decay, that rises from rot, can be so intimately tied to life, that the same kingdom we associate with death and decomposition is also the source of our renewal. But that's the nature of fungi. They defy the binaries we try to impose, sick or well, alive or dead, poison or cure. They remind us that everything is connected, that healing isn't always about erasing harm. Sometimes it's about reweaving what's been torn. In a way, the medicines of fungi are not interventions, they're translations. They take the language of survival, of adaptation, and teach it to our bodies. They show us how to fight smarter, not harder, how to let go of what doesn't serve us, how to coexist. Some of the most promising antibiotics of the future may already exist in a patch of mold under your house or in the soil near a quiet stream. Some of the next great cancer treatments may lie inside a mushroom not yet named. The solutions aren't waiting to be built. They're waiting to be noticed. And perhaps that's the lesson, too, that healing often comes not from invention, but from remembering where we came from honoring the organisms that kept us alive long before we knew how to say thank you. The forest is a pharmacy. The fungus is the pharmacist. And in every spore, every thread, every soft bloom of mycelium, there is the same message. You are not separate from this world. You belong to it, and it will care for you if you learn how to listen. There is a darker side to the kingdom of fungi, one that doesn't heal or nourish, one that doesn't recycle or rebuild. It's older than medicine, older than science, older even than fear. It hides in rye fields and bread loaves, in damp granaries and forgotten sacks of grain. It slips into the body unseen, rewiring the mind, twisting perception, peeling back reality until the familiar turns monstrous. It is ergot, an unassuming fungus with a history soaked in madness, hysteria, and blood. Ergot is not the soft, fleshy mushroom you picture on a forest floor. It's a parasite, a sclerotia that infects the heads of rye and other grains, blending invisibly into the harvest. Once baked into bread, it enters the bloodstream and begins its strange work. At first, it constricts blood vessels. Then it floods the body with alkaloids that mimic serotonin. Muscles spasm, limbs burn, fingers blacken and fall away. And in the mind, visions bloom terrifying, ecstatic, unbidden. A farmer sees demons in his fields. A mother sees angels above her bed. A town sees witches in its midst. For centuries, entire communities were ravaged by outbreaks of ergotism, known in the Middle Ages as Street Anthony's Fire. Villages would erupt into chaos as hallucinations spread, convulsions rippled through the sick, and bodies rotted from the inside out. There was no understanding of microbes, no concept of mycotoxins. It was witchcraft. It was punishment. It was God. And so the fungus continued its silent war, devouring harvests and unraveling minds. One of the most infamous chapters in its history unfolded. In colonial Massachusetts in 1692, the Salem witch trials began with a handful of young girls claiming they were being tormented by unseen forces. They convulsed and screamed, spoke in tongues, claimed to see devils and spirits. Within months, hysteria consumed the town. Dozens were accused, 19 were executed, hundreds more were imprisoned. Centuries later, researchers proposed a chilling possibility that the rye harvested that year was infected with ergot. The girls' visions, their fits, their unexplainable symptoms, all mirrored classic ergotism. If true, then one of the most notorious witch hunts in history may have been sparked not by sorcery, but by a fungus growing quietly in the bread bowl. It wasn't the first time ergot had shaped human events. In ancient Greece, initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites held in honor of Demeter and Persephone, drank a potion called kykeon that scholars now believe may have contained a diluted form of ergot. Participants described transcendent visions, encounters with gods, journeys into death and back again. The ceremonies lasted for nearly 2,000 years, shaping Greek philosophy, art, and religion. Plato, Sophocles, and Cicero all spoke of the mysteries with reverence. What they saw, what they felt, remains unknown. But if ergot was indeed their doorway, then the same fungus that drove villages mad may also have opened the minds of some of history's greatest thinkers. That is the unsettling paradox of ergot. It destroys and enlightens. It kills and reveals. In high doses, it maims and burns. In controlled amounts, its alkaloids become medicine. From ergot, chemists derived ergotamine, used to treat migraines. From ergot, Albert Hofmann synthesized LSD, one of the most potent hallucinogens known. What once poisoned entire towns now fuels some of the most profound explorations of consciousness. The same chemical family that sparked witch trials and mass hysteria also birthed a revolution in psychiatry and neuroscience. But this duality has always been present in fungi. They refuse to sit neatly in the boxes we build good or evil, sacred or profane. They heal and they harm, often with the same molecules. And ergot, more than any other, embodies that contradiction. It is the shadow side of the psychedelic, the darker mirror of the mushroom that shows not unity and wonder, but chaos and terror. History is littered with its fingerprints. In medieval France, thousands died in outbreaks so severe that towns carved monuments to commemorate the afflicted. During sieges, armies burned infected grain stores, fearing that to eat was to go mad. Some historians even speculate that ergot poisoning contributed to strange episodes of collective delirium recorded throughout Europe. Dancing plagues, mass visions, towns overtaken by inexplicable madness. The line between the sacred and the insane has always been thinner than we'd like to admit. Ergot walks that line, and perhaps that's what makes it so haunting. It reminds us that the mind is not a fortress. It is a landscape, easily altered, shockingly fragile. A few molecules can turn neighbor against neighbor, can conjure gods or devils from the air. A fungus, small and silent, can tilt the course of history without ever being seen. Even now, ergot remains a ghost in our medicines, in our stories, in our nightmares. We no longer fear the blackened rye, but we live with its legacy every time a surgeon uses ergot-derived drugs to stop bleeding, every time a scientist studies serotonin receptors, every time a conversation drifts toward the origins of LSD and the strange paths that led us here. In the end, ergot is not evil. It is not good. It is simply powerful. And power, wielded without understanding, is always dangerous. It grows quietly in the field, waiting for rain, for harvest, for bread. It has no intention, no plan. And yet, time and again, it has reached into our stories and rewritten them. It has been the spark of madness and the seed of revelation. It has burned villages and illuminated mysteries. It has worn the faces of witches and gods alike. And if there's a lesson in its dark history, perhaps it's this, that the boundary between transcendence and terror is thin, that the same forces that lift us beyond ourselves can also tear us apart, that in the smallest things, spores on a grain, alkaloids in a loaf, the fate of worlds can shift. Somewhere in a forgotten field, the rye is blooming, the fungus is spreading, and in its silence, it carries the memory of every fevered vision, every trial, every whispered prayer. It carries the story of how even the humblest life can shape empires, ignite madness, and change the way we dream. Your body, right now, is not just yours. Even in this stillness, lying in bed, heart steady, breath slow, your skin hums with invisible life. Tiny organisms move through the folds of your fingerprints, drift across the curve of your scalp, nestle in the corners of your gut. They're not invaders, they are residents, symbionts, tenants who never pay rent, but without whom the house might fall apart. And among them, soft and overlooked, are fungi. You are not just human, you are a biome, a walking, breathing, thinking ecosystem. Bacteria often steal the spotlight in this microscopic drama, but fungi are there too, quietly threading themselves into your biology. Scientists call it the mycobiome, the community of fungi that live on and within us. It's smaller than the bacterial microbiome, but not less important. And like everything fungal, it blurs boundaries between self and other, between life and decay, between help and harm. Most of the time, you don't notice them. On your skin, they live in the warm hollows and oily patches behind your ears, in your armpits, between your toes. They thrive on sweat and sebum, the trace offerings your body sheds without thought. One of the most common, Malassezia, feeds on skin oils and may help maintain a delicate balance between protection and inflammation. But if the balance tips, if the skin becomes too dry or too oily, if the immune system falters, Malassezia can trigger dandruff, dermatitis, even infection. It's not a villain, just a partner with needs. A reminder that symbiosis is a negotiation, not a guarantee. Deeper inside, in the winding passages of your digestive tract, another fungal companion makes its home, Candida. It's there in nearly everyone, kept in check by immune cells and microbial rivals. But when those guards are distracted by antibiotics, stress, illness, Candida can bloom. It changes shape, growing filaments that pierce through tissue, shifting from quiet guest to opportunistic saboteur. What was once harmless becomes invasive, a symptom of imbalance echoed in fatigue, inflammation, or more severe infections. And yet, Candida is also part of us. Its presence teaches our immune system what to tolerate, what to fight. It keeps the edges of vigilance sharp. This constant fungal presence isn't passive. The microbiome shapes immunity in subtle, ongoing ways. The body learns from it, responds to it, builds resilience through repeated contact. Children raised in ultra-sterile environments are more prone to allergies, autoimmune conditions, and asthma, suggesting that this everyday microbial chatter helps calibrate the body's defenses. Fungi, in particular, seem to signal a kind of danger training, a whisper that says, "Learn this shape, prepare for more." The immune system, like any good memory, is shaped by what it's exposed to. But there's something even stranger, something that pulls us beyond the realm of infection and immunity. Emerging research hints that fungi might influence mood, that shifts in the fungal community within the gut could correlate with depression, anxiety, and cognitive change. The gut, with its sprawling network of neurons and chemicals, is already considered a second brain, and like the brain, it responds to patterns, nutrients, hormones, microbial signals. If fungi can sway those signals, even slightly, then our sense of self might be more porous than we imagined. Imagine that. A thought, subtly nudged by a cell wall component. A mood, turned darker or lighter by the rise and fall of microscopic populations in your colon. We often think of consciousness as pristine, untouched, but perhaps it's a garden, tended by the quiet work of microbes and mycelia alike. Perhaps the edges of who you are blur into the lives of things you cannot see. Of course, much of this remains unknown. The science of the human microbiome is still new, filled with contradictions and questions. We're only beginning to understand which species live where, what they do, how they change across age, diet, geography. In some people, a particular fungal strain flourishes. In others, it barely appears. Genetics plays a role, environment plays a role, and so does chance. You might carry strains no one else does. Your fungal signature, like a fingerprint, is uniquely yours. Still, patterns emerge. People with certain conditions like Crohn's disease or irritable bowel syndrome often show altered fungal profiles. People undergoing chemotherapy may see their microbiome shift dramatically, opening the door to infection or inflammation. Even diet can shape it. A week of high sugar intake may fuel a quiet fungal bloom. A shift to high fiber may starve it out. These changes don't announce themselves loudly. They happen below awareness, shaping your biology one silent interaction at a time. But perhaps the most humbling truth is this: fungi have always lived on us. Before we named them, before we knew they were there, before microscopes or petri dishes, they were part of the skin we wore. Ancient, familiar, at times adversarial, but never truly foreign. They belong to us in a way that's difficult to describe and impossible to dismiss. So tonight, as you lie still and drift towards sleep, remember this: you are never alone. Even now, in the darkness, Life unfolds across your skin. Cells divide. Spores rest. Hyphae tangle in invisible networks. They do not speak. They do not think. But they are with you, as old as breath, as intimate as touch. You are not just a single being. You are a colony, a chorus, a layered complexity of human and more than human. And somewhere in that chorus, the fungi hum their quiet note, not in menace, not in praise, but in presence. They are under your skin, and they always have been. Beneath the roots of stories and the soil of time, something waits. Bright red, crowned with white speckles, the Amanita muscaria sits like a jewel in the forest shadows. It looks like a secret, like a door left ajar, and in many cultures, it is exactly that. This mushroom is no ordinary organism. It is a symbol, a cipher, a messenger cloaked in color and myth. For thousands of years, people have found it growing where logic falters and dream begins. At the base of old trees, in the clearing after rain, on the edge of vision, just before the forest begins to whisper. In fairy tales, it's everywhere. The red and white toadstool under which elves gather and gnomes sleep. It stands like punctuation in the backgrounds of children's books, in paintings, in holiday decorations, without anyone quite remembering why. But the roots of its image run deep into Siberian shamanism, into Norse myth, into oral traditions older than memory. It is not simply a plant, it is an invitation, a warning, a threshold between worlds. Among the indigenous peoples of Siberia, Amanita muscaria was not just observed, it was consumed. Shamans would ingest the mushroom to enter altered states of consciousness, slipping into trance, traveling between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. Wrapped in furs, they would fall into the snow and rise into vision, guided by the mushroom's hand. And in these rituals, we find echoes of older patterns. The color red, associated with fire and blood. The white spots, like stars or snow or breath. The shape of the cap, round and bright like a sun that rises from the forest floor. Some scholars trace our image of Santa Claus to these traditions. A figure dressed in red and white, descending through chimneys in the dead of winter, bearing gifts. In certain Siberian rituals, the shaman would enter the yurts through the smoke hole, carrying mushrooms that had been dried by hanging them in trees like ornaments. Reindeer, common in these regions, were said to eat Amanita muscaria as well, leaping and prancing under its influence. The line between myth and hallucination begins to blur, and suddenly, what seems like innocent holiday imagery, the sleigh, the flying deer, the glowing red beacon, becomes something older, stranger, more entangled with fungi than we imagined. But Amanita is not alone. Across cultures, mushrooms appear as sacred intermediaries, bridges between the mundane and the mystical. In Mesoamerica, psilocybin mushrooms were revered as Teonanacatl, the flesh of the gods. Consumed in ceremonies, they opened the mind to visions, to the voice of ancestors, to landscapes unseen. Spanish missionaries, upon witnessing these rites, described them as demonic, too powerful, too vivid to be anything but forbidden. But to those who practiced them, they were not hallucinations. They were truths too large to be seen with waking eyes. In ancient Greece, mystery cults performed secret rites, many lost to time. But in Eleusis, there were whispers of a potion, kykeon, that may have contained psychoactive ingredients, possibly ergot, a fungal derivative. Participants emerged changed, speaking of death and rebirth, of light buried deep in the earth. These were not idle entertainments. They were transformative acts, and fungi's subtle, strange, unrooted things were the key. Perhaps it makes sense. Fungi exist in margins. They appear without warning, vanish without trace. They feed on decay and turn it into life. They resemble the process of dying, and yet they are essential to birth. In myth, such creatures are always sacred, tricksters, messengers, oracles. Not quite gods, but close enough to whisper in their stead. And so, even in modern stories, they remain. In video games and fantasy novels, in fairy circles that dot the grass after rain, in the strange pull you might feel when you stumble on a mushroom alone in the woods, an instinct older than explanation. Part wonder, part fear, a recognition that this thing does not belong to us, not entirely, that it exists on its own terms, in its own language, pulsing with its own meaning. Mushrooms are not just chemical curiosities or biological recyclers. They are symbols, archetypes. Their power lies not only in what they do, but in what we have asked them to mean. Across time, across cultures, they have been portals into the psyche, into the underworld, into the divine. They do not need temples. The forest is enough. And as you rest now, lying still in the quiet of night, you might imagine the snow falling gently outside a yurt in some forgotten winter, a red and white cap emerging through the frost. A figure cloaked in fur stepping over the threshold between one world and the next. Not a myth, not entirely, just a mushroom, and the dream it carries. It's easy to think of fungi as something far away, deep in the forest, glowing beneath fallen logs, growing in the damp folds of untouched earth, strange and mysterious and rare. But the truth is, fungi live closer than that, much closer. You've brought them into your home, invited them to your table, even lifted them to your lips without a second thought. Not just once or twice, but every day, in the quiet, invisible work they do, baking, brewing, ripening, transforming. Fungi are not only part of ancient ritual or alien intelligence, they're part of breakfast. When you tear into a loaf of bread, soft and steaming in the center, you are tasting the ghost of a single-celled fungus yeast that once feasted on sugar, released carbon dioxide, and made the dough rise. The bread is its monument. In every bubble, every soft hollowed space, is the echo of fermentation, a quiet labor, a fungal breath. Yeast is among the oldest companions of human civilization. It's not an invention, but a discovery, an observation that dough left in the open began to rise on its own, a miracle before microbiology gave it a name. For millennia, we've cultivated it without quite understanding it, learning through trial and time how to guide its appetites, how to feed it just enough, how to coax it into creating something delicious, something warm, something alive with motion even in stillness. The same goes for beer and wine. Fermentation is a fungal alchemy. Yeast consumes sugars and turns them into alcohol, bubbles, and complex flavors that swirl on the tongue like a memory. Each brew is its own ecology, each bottle a miniature habitat, and we are not separate from it. We sip the result and taste the handiwork of an organism that has never spoken and yet has shaped entire cultures. There's a kind of intimacy in this relationship, even if we don't always recognize it. Fungi enter our bodies not as invaders, but as co-creators. In cheese, they transform milk into something richer, more pungent, more nuanced than its beginning. Blue veins running through Roquefort are colonies of Penicillium roqueforti, chosen for their ability to mold flavor as well as texture. The rind of brie, soft and pale, is also the work of fungi, protective, edible, and precise. Without them, cheese would simply be spoiled milk. But with them, it becomes something enduring, something that ages gracefully, something that holds a landscape in taste. Fermentation isn't just survival, it's expression, it's transformation, and fungi are its artists. This ancient collaboration exists all around us in ways that are so familiar we forget to wonder. Soy sauce, miso, tempeh, all born from fungal processes refined over generations. Each culture discovered its own fungal partners, tamed them, adapted them, and handed down the knowledge like a recipe etched in the rhythms of daily life. These are not sterile experiments. They are rituals, acts of trust, a form of biological storytelling. Yeast, for all its ubiquity, remains a marvel. Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Its scientific name translates loosely to sugar fungus of beer. It's been with us since before we knew what a cell was, and yet today we can sequence its genome, engineer its behavior, even teach it to produce medicines and biofuels. But in kitchens and breweries, its magic remains tactile. A dough rising on a countertop is not just chemistry, it is memory, culture, and biology folded together. And still, there is more. Fungi play roles in everything from soy sauce to salami, from kombucha to kefir. They blur the boundary between spoilage and preservation, between decay and creation. In the right balance, in the right hands, they elevate food into something sacred, not merely consumed, but celebrated. Their work is slow, invisible, patient, and yet profoundly transformative. So, when you open your fridge and reach for cheese, or slice into bread fresh from the oven, or sip something fermented and fizzy, you're participating in an ancient communion. You are joining your breath with another's. The product of life not just lived, but shared. Fungi are not strangers. They are the oldest roommates you've ever had, the silent helpers in your pantry, the ones who speak not in words, but in flavor, in texture, in the way dough stretches and cracks, in the way bubbles rise from the bottom of a glass. And maybe that's the most extraordinary thing of all, not just that fungi glow in the dark or speak through roots or digest plastic, but that they are with us, not only in myth or mystery, but in our most ordinary human moments, at dinner tables, in family recipes, in the quiet sigh of rising dough. The fungus among us isn't hidden, it's home. The future, for all its gleaming machines and digital shadows, may not be built from metal or plastic or even code. It may rise instead from something soft and fibrous, something ancient and breathing, something that stretches through the dark like a whisper. The future may be fungal. Already, it is growing beneath the surface quietly, steadily, with no need for applause. Scientists and dreamers alike are turning to fungi not just for food or medicine, but for structure, for energy, for the very blueprints of sustainability. Mycelium, that fine-rooted lace of fungal life, has stepped out of the forest and into the lab, not as a curiosity but as a foundation. It is being grown into bricks stronger than concrete, shaped into biodegradable leather, coaxed into packaging that melts back into soil without a trace. Where industry once carved scars into the earth, mycelium builds by becoming. There are no smokestacks, no waste, no grinding gears, only a soft proliferation, form emerging from formlessness. This is not science fiction. In studios and startups across the world, people are already wearing fungal shoes, sitting on fungal furniture, walking into fungal buildings. The material is light, strong, fire-resistant, and, when its time is done, it returns to the earth willingly. It does not linger in landfills or poison the air. It was alive once. It still is. Beyond design and architecture, fungi are reshaping the way we grow and store energy. Researchers have begun to explore fungal batteries systems powered by the conductive properties of certain mycelial structures. It's not hard to imagine a future in which your phone is charged by the forest floor, in which light glows softly from a source that once sprouted from the playing bark of a tree. This isn't about replacing wires with roots, but about listening, really listening to what fungi have always known about networks, about distribution, about resilience. Even agriculture is being rewritten by fungal intelligence. Soil health is now understood not just as a matter of nutrients, but of relationships, fungi, bacteria, plants, and time in constant conversation. Mycorrhizal fungi extend the reach of plant roots, guiding water and minerals with uncanny precision. They're not just helpers, they're partners. With the rise of regenerative farming, mycelium becomes not a tool but a teacher, showing us how to grow without depletion, how to feed without extraction, how to cultivate systems that nourish everything they touch. Fungi are also beginning to feed us in new ways. Companies are producing protein-rich mycoproteins, meats without animals, grown not in slaughterhouses, but in fermentation chambers. These aren't substitutes, they're evolutions. The taste of a future where food doesn't cost the planet. In a time of ecological crisis, this shift is not just promising, it's essential. And it doesn't end there. Fungi may soon be woven into the fabric of cities, not just as walls or furniture, but as living infrastructure buildings that breathe, repair themselves, respond to their environments. Imagine a roof that senses rain and redirects it. Imagine insulation that thickens in winter. Imagine a home that ages like a forest, changing, adapting, giving back. But even more compelling than the innovations is the philosophy behind them. Fungi do not conquer, they collaborate. They do not dominate ecosystems, they weave them together. They do not insist on permanence, they thrive in transition. In embracing fungi, we are being asked not just to use different materials, but to think differently, to reimagine growth as something circular, interconnected, and alive, to see value not in control, but in connection. And perhaps that is the quiet revolution waiting beneath our feet. Not a future of domination, but of dialogue. Not skyscrapers that scrape the sky, but habitats that listen to the wind. Not machines that consume, but systems that reciprocate. Fungi invite us into a future that is less about ownership and more about stewardship. Less about speed, more about depth. Less about building up, more about growing through. In the great unfolding of time, fungi were here before us, and they will be here after. But now, for a brief, shimmering moment, we have the chance to walk beside them, not just in the woods, but in our cities, our homes, our choices. We can shape a future that doesn't mimic the forest but belongs to it. The age of fossil fuels, of synthetic everything, of single-use thinking, it had its time. But something else is taking root now. Something quieter, older, wiser. Not a product of progress, but a return to it, a remembering. The 21st century may belong to fungi, not because they've changed, but because we finally have. And if we listen, truly listen, we might hear the future not in the hum of machines, but in the patient, pulsing silence of the soil. We might build not with cement, but with threads of connection. We might grow what we used to manufacture. We might breathe a little easier, because the future is not only coming, it is already growing.